August the 31st, 2021. Guys, it's Tuesday morning. We've had a little bit of sunshine, first time in a couple of days since Ida came ashore just south of us here in Louisiana. We fared really good here where I'm at. We had a few limbs down, nothing major, just high winds, ground saturated, things like that, but nothing major here. Now, in some of the counties around us, Rankin County for one, they had about 15,000 people without power yesterday morning. I'm not sure. It was no major damages, so that should be being able to be corrected pretty quickly. In other words, as we were driving in from Arizona, and we were coming through North Louisiana between Shreveport and Vicksburg, Mississippi. That would have been Saturday evening late. It was windy, rainy. I mean, you could tell there was some power coming in on the storm, but there were lines of power company trucks that you see coming in, these utility trucks that do the repair damage, and they were already coming in. It looked like they were actually coming in out of the Texas area, headed towards Mississippi. I don't know where they ended up. We passed a couple of different convoys of them. And they will stage outside of an area, and then as it becomes safe enough for them to go in and look at it and start repairing it, they will. But they will get as close as they can, and that was kind of my plan too, trying to get back. I didn't know if we would make it all the way back in before it would be shut down, but we made it in, and we were very fortunate here. We haven't lost power, even though I had my solar panel backup system ready. I just wanted to be here. Make sure I could activate that, and if you had one limb come through the roof, you could quickly get it out, put a tarp over it before it ruined your entire house, things like that. That was all in the back of my mind, and I just don't want to start over at this point in my life. Anyway, and I think it all came from Katrina, which happened all these years later on the date of Katrina when the storm came in. And here it was a totally different story. New Orleans was in bad shape. You saw all the houses flooded, people coming up out of having to cut holes in their roof and sitting on the roof waiting for a helicopter. That happened. There were levees that were breached in New Orleans. But here it was devastating also, not in the flood areas because we're kind of on a hill, but the wind damage and no power, no water for 2 weeks. In traveling, I've told you the story 100 times, had to travel to another city and try to get in a gas line and then try to get in a food line at a grocery store or something like that for those 2 weeks. And it became very hot after the storm, and the sun came back out. It was August, one of the hottest months of the year, and it was very rough heat to try to endure if you weren't used to it. Well, that convinced me about certain things, and that was backup water, backup food, backup power. And that was the fear in me as I was driving back that was going to happen again. And so under normal circumstances, being inland somewhat as we are, I would not have been that concerned, but because of the strength of the storm, I was very concerned and had to cut everything short and get back. But New Orleans and South Louisiana did not fare well at all. Some people are downplaying that, and they shouldn't, because there's actually more grid damage now than there was in Katrina. They're saying Hurricane Ida exposes grid weaknesses as 2,000 miles of high voltage lines damaged. Guys, that would stretch from the East Coast to the West Coast of the U.S. I just almost drove it there and back within a week. But this is all in southeast Louisiana, and these are not the telephone poles and the light poles that you see going down the side of the road, the wood ones. These are the big metal towers, big ones, and high transmission damages. We've got some pictures I'll show you here in the videos. But it says more than 1 million customers across Louisiana are without power on Tuesday morning. Now, this million customers is 1 million meters. You may have 3 or 4, 5 people in that house. Do you understand what I'm saying? But it's really 1,400,000, 1,014,000, something like that. We'll take a look at that. But again, it's not individuals. So there's a lot of people affected. Some reports indicate it could take weeks for the lights to come back on, as thousands of miles of transmission lines were damaged after Hurricane Ida rolled through on Sunday. The Category 4 hurricane raises fresh questions about how well New Orleans and other coastal areas across Louisiana are prepared for natural disasters. Some things you cannot prepare for. Some things are out of the control of man. Even though man can affect certain aspects of nature, we were told in the end times there would be great tempests and storms and other things that are going on. Things that you cannot control. And some people say, well, you maybe want to bury your transmission lines. Guys, you realize that New Orleans is below sea level. You don't dig a lot. All the graves are above ground. The swimming pools can't be drained because they will float up out of the ground. I'm talking about all the big concrete ones, all of them. You can't drain them because there's so much water saturating that area. It's the bayou. It's a swamp. You've seen it on Swamp People. It says power out as of 6:30 Eastern Time this morning. PowerOutages.us reports a little more than 1 million customers are without power across the state's coastal plain. Let's take a look at a map about this. Now, this is real clear on the indication of where the hardest hit areas are. Blue, there's 0% outages in this part of the state because this is where it came in. If you go into the yellow areas, which there are none, and the gray areas, which are none, you'd be at 10%. Then you start getting to a couple of orange areas where 30% of the power is gone. A little darker red, you get 60%. Or without power, and then most of this dark red area here, again, 2,000 miles of transmission lines, it's 100% out. Guys, this is the entire Mississippi River all the way up into New Orleans and past it. You understand what I'm saying? Tremendous amount of people in that area. I lived down in Buras, Louisiana in 1964-65 when I was 9 years old. And it wasn't that populated then, but there were a lot of people. But now that's all changed. There's a new highway that goes from New Orleans all the way to the end of the Mississippi River in Fort Jackson down through there. You got Port Sulphur, Buras, Empower, on and on. But now it's really built up, and it's affecting a lot more people. But at that time, I mentioned learning about hurricanes with Katrina. Well, I also learned things in Camille. But down here, we had to evacuate. It was 1964-65 when Hurricane Betsy came through. We evacuated back to central Mississippi with relatives. Well, in my family, we were in the oil. My parents were in the oil field business at that time, and you traveled a lot. But for that year or so, during that area, we evacuated, came back. The Mississippi River down south of New Orleans at about 80 miles had breached the levees. If you've ever been down there, the levees are probably the highest hills in that area in many, many places, because as they built the levees up year after year, after the river becomes full of silt, there's actually a hill you got to climb to get up and look at the river. And so any levee breach is just an immediate outpouring of water. And so during that time, Betsy came through our area. The flood came just south of us, the heaviest flood on the breach of the dikes there, the levees on the river. And it destroyed the streetcars in New Orleans. I remember that it was almost like San Francisco. You had these streetcars and electric trolley cars that went all up and down some of the main streets. And they still have a few that they rebuilt, but it's not the same anymore. I mean, most of that, all that was taken out. And then the power in New Orleans was taken out really early, which controlled a lot of the pumps. The levees were breached. People were trapped in the attics again. 1,000 calls came in immediately to the Cajun Navy that needed rescue. Then the 911 system went out, and you couldn't call for help, not to emergency response. But guys, again, I'm going to show you some pictures of those power lines. And this is not like, if you just had 2,000 miles of the wooden poles or in some cases through the cities, the metal poles that have your electrical lines on them. That would take a long time. I don't care how many people you brought in, but like I said, the convoy of the bucket trucks and stuff that were coming in that we saw Saturday evening, those are not the type of trucks and equipment that can put up the high transmission lines. That's a totally different game. It's big cranes and in some places helicopters that work on these big lines and re-erect the lines and the towers. And I don't have a picture of that now, but I did see one of the big 5G towers, huge one like the transmission line towers. It was still standing, but if you've ever seen one up close, it'll have dozens of these high voltage cables that run from a little building right beside the tower, comes underground and goes all the way to the top to whatever antennas and things like that they're supporting. They were all ripped out and blowing straight in the wind. So it's not just power when they get that back on. It may be a brief break, but some of the big transmission towers for 5G and 4G and phone lines, they were also affected. And guys, these big transmission lines can support a large area. So the energy provider Energy Corp, which is also here in Mississippi, has been surveying the damage since Monday and has found 207 transmission lines spanning more than 2,000 miles have been knocked out by the storm. And this is from the Wall Street Journal. Rod West, Entergy's group president of utility operations, said drones, helicopters, and land-based vehicles are surveying the damage and estimated it could take at least 3 weeks to restore the power. Guys, that is a very conservative estimate. I'm sure that some areas will start seeing power maybe sooner than that. But we didn't have that kind of damage here in Katrina this far north. But there was so much, not in the high transmission lines, but there was a lot of damage on the ground-based poles, the wood poles and things like that. But it took 2 weeks then here. And it took much longer than that if you got down around Gulfport in those areas. And right now there's a search which has peaked on the internet for generators. And let me say this, we ran out in days here after Katrina. You couldn't find them. You could call Birmingham, Alabama. You could call Atlanta, Georgia, Dallas, Texas from here. They were out. They had been bought up. But when you don't have electricity, remember this in your search for generators, it's going to be hard to get propane or gasoline or whatever fuels run your generator. You're going to have to travel with tanks, like people here did to other states in some cases, to fill up those extra tanks in the back of your truck to get back home for your generators. And that in itself had a lot to do with me going solar after Katrina. And I have a small generator, but it wouldn't run your entire house, and it actually has never been out of the box. I've had it for a few years just as a backup. Haven't had to use it because of my solar panels. So think about that. And actually, you can, for the price of one of the big Generacs or something like that, $5-6 grand, and they get higher than that, you can build a very extensive solar panel system with today's prices, and if you do the labor. And if you got questions about any of that, put them in the comments. And I built my system, and I studied thousands of pages of information, watched hundreds of videos to get it right. And I can share some of that knowledge with you if that's what you decide to do. But we are getting into some rough times, and I think we're getting into the end times. Let me show you a picture. Now, this is one of them. This is the type line that I'm talking about. And you can see there's some wooden pole damage also. See the top of this one and the pole here? But look behind it. This is what feeds those smaller poles. 207 lines are affected. 2,000 miles. These things stretch a long way. And they're saying the hard part is that the geography is a rather wide swath. Guys, just the eye was 15 miles wide. And the winds at 150 miles an hour around that is the same as a Cat 3 tornado. And that will tear your house all to pieces. But that it was a 15-mile wide, just the opening. It said that that 3 weeks is not going to apply to everybody the same way. He added some transmission towers need to be replaced entirely due to significant wind damage. And I saw one picture, and it was a drone video, actually. And there was one of these on both sides of the river that were down, and all these high voltage lines were in the water, going across the river, but underwater, the ones that were still intact. So you just, again, you're talking about, that's helicopter work, not to put the towers up necessarily, but to strand between them across a large river. Trucks aren't going to do it. And I know I have friends that have put the big transmission lines up in the continent of Africa, and they work with helicopters every day. Now, this is another image, but they're talking about there was more damage to transmission lines in Ida than Katrina because of the 150-mile-per-hour sustained winds. That was stronger than Katrina. A lot of damage was pushed further north by Katrina because of, I guess, the strength and the energy that was in that storm. But this one did not do that much damage this far north as we are now. About an hour and a half, 2-hour drive from the beach itself. But they're saying, again, they even re-strengthened it. But Katrina's damage was done in the New Orleans area by all of the levees going down. A lot of the levees, not all of them, but it was enough to cause the Corps of Engineers to come in, and I don't know how many billions of dollars they put into re-strengthening the levees. But one of them failed, and then the power that pumped all the water out failed. But luckily, some of the levees held, but there's still, again, I saw images yesterday morning of airboats and other boats going into neighborhoods and trying to get people out of the attics. Imagine that, no power at night, stuck in your attic with the rest of your house underwater. And, yeah, you have alligators and snakes. But anyway, Energy is saying it was not just the transmission lines, but some of Energy's power plants have sustained damage. This is going to add to the time. West said the damage at some plants would not hinder energy production. One of their nuclear power plants 25 miles west of New Orleans on the Mississippi River was shuttered ahead of the storm. They got it shut down as far as, I guess, it being susceptible to high wind damage. West said they rebuilt the transmission system over the years to withstand speeds of 150 miles an hour. Still, it appears, he said, some of these high-voltage cables that carry electricity from power plants to substations that connect to lower voltage distribution lines were no match for Ida. There's no match for nature. Like I said, even if it's somewhat slightly manipulated in certain cases, when it gets started, all you can do is get out. And one of the sad things, I mentioned it the last couple of days, was before the storm came in, I was watching and sending videos in from Arizona. I saw one where the mayor was saying that 2 days ahead of it, it was too late to evacuate. And then yesterday, the mayor and some other folks came out in New Orleans, one of the first emergency response press briefings, and said that if you evacuated from this part of Louisiana, don't come back yet. He said there's no water, no power, things like that. But he said, and you know, it just makes you wonder. But if it was me, I don't care if I had to camp out in the tent. If I could come back and try to start rebuilding and working on my property and guarding it and things like that, then that's where I would want to be. And I know that's true because when I built this place where I live now, and it's taken the years, we've added on. When we first built it, we were coming from our old location and camping on the weekends in a tent and working without electricity and getting the main beams and everything done. All that was cut with a chainsaw. I would rather be doing that than sitting at a hotel that I couldn't afford and not knowing what was going on back home. But that's what they're telling them, don't come back yet. He said that, and West, he said that it's not just energy, that they're tied to other generation customers. So they got to tie all that back together. But just, you're kind of going to be in it for the long haul, guys. And I hate to say this, but most of you have been through it before. This may be a little different because these towers and lines were meant to withstand 150 mile per hour winds. Now, this is what I was talking about. This is a search. Let me pull it up just a little bit. If you go and just check for top searches, generator, and you can see the spike here the last few days, and it gives the locations. Alexandria, Louisiana, you've got the highest searches. Lafayette's next, Lake Charles, Louisiana, Baton Rouge, and New Orleans. So you can see this wide area that's been affected. And I don't care how many the hardest working people I know are the ones that come out after a tornado or an ice storm and go through this weather and rebuild your lights, your electric system, and get your lights and power back on. Hardest working people, and they're brave because you're dealing with high voltage. But this is a lot of people that are searching, and they're searching for generators. I suggest go out of state, and our community got together after Katrina. We were without power. We found one of the major, it was a Caterpillar, like a huge generator in Birmingham, Alabama at the Caterpillar plant. And we had to have it shipped in on an 18-wheeler. And we got it in here, and we got power up to finally get water pumping up to the tall towers. You see the big water tanks. Well, they've got they're most of them on electric pumps. And so we got the generator tied in just a few days ahead of the power coming back on, but everybody was glad. And the water department here paid for it. But we got it, like I said, as a matter of fact, I'm the one that found the generator, and I know it can be done. But we had to pay, it was like $5,000, just to give you an idea. If you don't have water, because you don't have power, this is what we did. We, again, called Birmingham, found one. They had one left. It cost $5,000. It cost $1,000 to put it on an 18-wheeler and get it dropped over here. It got in at midnight. One of my friends I grew up with is an electrician, and he met them out there and tied this in, and we had water. And if I were in that situation, that's exactly what I would do. And we found one, and it was a big one. But because it was so many customers tied into this water district that we're in out in the country, then they gladly got that back up for us. And now we still have that generator for backup in case it happens again. And but anyway, this is what we're dealing with, guys. My heart goes out to you down there. I've been through it. I don't think we were hit as hard as you guys were, and I think it's going to take a lot longer than what they're talking about. So just, again, thoughts are out. Prayers are up for you. And if there's anything we can do to help here from Mississippi, we've done it before, then come in the comments, let us know. We'll see what we can do. It's a heads up. Be safe.